Sometimes, one wrong text message is all it takes to change who lives in fear and who everyone else should fear instead. Ava Brooks pressed herself against the cold metal shelves inside the mansion's laundry room, her trembling fingers wrapped around a buzzing phone she could barely hold steady. Above her, somewhere on the third floor of Damian Moretti's lakefront penthouse, heavy footsteps crossed marble floors with the kind of calm authority that made grown men lower their eyes. The mansion was silent again now, but 10 minutes earlier, it hadn't been. Earlier, Ava had stepped out of the service hallway carrying fresh towels when she saw two men in dark suits rushing through the main corridor with another man between them. One side of his white dress shirt had been stained dark red, and Damian Moretti himself had walked beside them with a face carved from pure ice, giving orders in a voice so low Ava couldn't make out the words. She should have looked away. She should have kept walking like the invisible maid everyone expected her to be. But fear had rooted her to the polished floor for one fatal second too long, and Damian's dark eyes had lifted briefly in her direction. Not angry. Not surprised. Worse. Aware. Ava had spent 6 months working inside the Moretti estate, and in those 6 months she'd learned one thing very quickly. Powerful men didn't need to yell to make people afraid of them. Especially men like Damian Moretti. Men whispered about him all across Chicago in beauty salons, diners, parking garages, and church basements. Women lowered their voices when saying his name. Men checked over their shoulders first. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something far more dangerous. Ava didn't know which stories were true. She never wanted to know. Her job was simple. Clean quietly. Speak rarely. Stay invisible. Invisible people survived. But now, crouched inside the laundry room while her pulse hammered against her ribs, survival suddenly felt very far away. Her phone screen glowed against the darkness as she opened a message thread with her cousin Renee. Ava's fingers shook so badly she mistyped the first sentence twice before deleting it. Finally she wrote, "If anything happens to me, it was him." Her breathing caught as she stared at the words. Too dramatic. Too dangerous. But the image of that blood-stained shirt wouldn't leave her mind. Neither would the memory of Damian Moretti standing perfectly still while everyone around him moved in panic. Like chaos itself answered to him. Ava quickly added another message. "I think my boss just had someone hurt." Then she hit send. The message disappeared instantly. Relief lasted less than 2 seconds. Then her stomach dropped so hard she thought she might faint. Because the contact name at the top of the screen didn't say Renee. It said Damian Moretti. Ava stopped breathing. The entire room seemed to tilt sideways as panic crashed through her chest in violent waves. "No," she whispered hoarsely, scrambling to unsend the message. But it was too late. Read. The tiny gray notification appeared beneath the text like a death sentence. Ava stared at the screen as cold sweat slid down the back of her neck. Nothing happened at first. No reply. No footsteps. No shouting. Just silence. Thick, endless silence. Then suddenly, 3 typing dots appeared on the screen. Disappeared. Appeared again. Ava's heartbeat became deafening. Finally, a single message arrived. "Come upstairs." No anger. No questions. Just 3 words. And somehow, that terrified her far more. Ava Brooks stared at the glowing message until the words blurred together. "Come upstairs." Her chest tightened so hard she thought she might be sick right there on the laundry room floor. Outside the narrow service door, the mansion remained unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that only existed in places where fear lived comfortably. Slowly, Ava pushed herself upright, her knees weak beneath her faded black housekeeping uniform. She glanced at the clock above the industrial dryers. 11:43 p.m. Most of the staff had already gone home an hour ago. The night crew stayed invisible by design. Quiet women in soft shoes cleaning evidence of wealthy lives before sunrise erased it all again. Ava usually loved the quiet. Tonight it felt like a warning. Her phone buzzed once more in her hand. Another message. From Damian Moretti. Now. Ava closed her eyes briefly. 6 months ago, when she first accepted the live-in housekeeping job at the Moretti estate, her aunt had begged her not to take it. Rich men with too much power are dangerous, she had warned over burnt coffee in her tiny South Side apartment. But danger paid better than safety. Damien Moretti paid 3 times more than any hotel in Chicago, and hospital bills did not care whether money came from saints or sinners. Especially not for 16-year-old boys waiting for heart surgery. Ava thought of her younger brother Malik sleeping under fluorescent hospital lights downtown, probably clutching the old basketball she bought him at a thrift store when he was 12. She sent almost every paycheck to his treatment fund. Every extra dollar mattered. Which meant losing this job was not an option. Even if tonight ended badly. Ava stepped into the empty hallway, the marble floor cold beneath her sneakers. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly overhead, reflecting against walls lined with expensive artwork nobody on staff was allowed to touch. The mansion looked less like a home at night and more like a museum built for ghosts. She walked carefully toward the private elevator reserved for Damien and his inner circle. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored doors. Dark skin. Tired eyes. Nervous hands. Invisible. Or at least she had been until now. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Ava stepped inside alone. As the doors slid shut, her pulse climbed higher with every passing second. 3rd floor. Private penthouse level. Restricted access. The elevator moved upward silently, smooth as water, while security cameras watched from each corner. Ava suddenly became aware of every detail about herself. The detergent stain near her sleeve. The loose curl escaping her bun. The fact that her hands would not stop shaking no matter how tightly she clasped them together. Every second felt like walking toward her own execution, she thought grimly as the floor numbers lit one by one. Then the elevator stopped. The doors opened directly into Damien Moretti's private penthouse. Warm amber light spilled across polished wood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Rain tapped softly against the glass outside, turning the city skyline into blurred gold and silver streaks. And there he was. Damien stood near the fireplace with one hand resting in his pocket, dressed in a charcoal button-down with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. No bodyguards. No shouting. No visible anger. Somehow that frightened Ava even more. He looked up slowly as she stepped out of the elevator. Those dark eyes settled on her face with terrifying calm. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the phone still clutched in her trembling fingers. "You think I hurt someone," he said quietly. Not a question. Ava's throat tightened. The room suddenly felt too warm, too still, too small for breathing. Damien watched her for a cost more than her mother's old apartment building. She did not belong here. Not in this room. Not in this world. Damien finally walked toward the windows overlooking Lake Michigan, one hand slipping into his pocket as if this conversation required no effort from him at all. "And your first instinct," he said quietly, "was to warn someone that I might hurt you." Ava lowered her eyes immediately. "I am sorry." "That is not an answer." His tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath every word now. Ava's fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles ached. "I did not know what else to think." Damien turned slightly toward her, the amber glow from the fireplace sharpening the hard angles of his face. Up close, he looked younger than the rumors suggested. Mid-30s maybe. But there was something tired behind his eyes tonight. Something heavier than anger. "Do you think I enjoy people being afraid of me?" he asked. Ava blinked in surprise. The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected threats. Demands. Maybe termination. Not this. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I think powerful men stop noticing when people are scared." Something flickered across Damien's expression then. Not rage. Not offense. Recognition. The room fell silent again. Ava immediately regretted speaking so honestly. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Softly. "I should not have sent those messages." Damien glanced, too personal now, too exposed. She hated herself for speaking this openly. Especially here. Especially to him. Damien walked slowly toward the bar near the windows, without another word. The room became deathly quiet again. Then he looked directly at Ava and said something that made the blood drain from her face. "One of my captains believes you saw too much tonight." aware of how isolated this entire floor was. The penthouse sat above the rest of the mansion like a fortress suspended over Chicago itself. Quiet, expensive, untouchable. Damien walked toward a sleek black monitor mounted beside the fireplace and pressed a button. Several security camera feeds instantly appeared across the screen. Hallways, garages, elevators, front gates. Ava recognized the main service corridor downstairs. Then she saw him. Victor Salazar stood near the staff elevators speaking with two security men. Even through grainy black and white footage, his posture radiated tension. "He is looking for you already," Damien said calmly. Ava's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because he does not trust coincidence." Damien folded his arms loosely. "A frightened maid sends suspicious messages minutes after sensitive business enters this house." Ava looked horrified. "But I did not tell anybody anything." "I know that." His voice softened slightly on the last sentence. "Victor does not." Ava wrapped her arms tightly around herself, fighting the sudden urge to cry. This world made no sense to her. Men speaking in half-truths. Fear hiding beneath expensive suits and polished marble floors. She should never have come here. She should have taken the diner job in Milwaukee instead of chasing bigger paychecks in Chicago. But then Malik would still be waiting even longer for surgery. Everything always came back to that. Damien studied her quietly before speaking again. "You trust me enough to stay here tonight?" The question surprised her. Ava looked up slowly. Most powerful men never asked for trust. They demanded obedience. But Damien waited patiently for an actual answer. Ava hesitated. Every survival instinct she had built since childhood screamed at her not to trust dangerous men. Yet somehow, standing here beneath the amber glow of the penthouse lights while rain washed across the windows behind him, Damien Moretti did not look like the most dangerous thing in the room anymore. Before she could answer, the private elevator chimed softly behind her. Both of them turned instantly toward the sound. Then a cold male voice echoed from the other side of the closing doors. "Boss, we need to talk about the maid." The private elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic sound that somehow felt louder than thunder inside the silent penthouse. Victor Salazar stepped out first, tall and broad-shouldered in a dark wool coat still damp from the rain outside. Two security men followed behind him, but neither spoke. They did not need to. Tension entered the room with Victor himself. Ava instinctively stepped backward. Victor's sharp eyes landed on her immediately, cold and assessing in a way that made her feel less like a person and more like a problem waiting to happen. "Boss," Victor said again, his deep voice calm but tight beneath the surface. "We need to discuss this privately." Damien did not move from where he stood near the fireplace. "You can say it in front of her." Victor's jaw flexed slightly. "With respect, I disagree." The room fell silent. Ava could practically feel invisible lines of power shifting between the two men. Victor had the posture of someone used to being obeyed. But Damien Moretti stood perfectly still, one hand resting loosely in his pocket, looking completely unbothered by the challenge. That calmness frightened Ava more than shouting ever could. Victor glanced at her again. She witnessed sensitive movement inside the house tonight. Then she sent messages implying you were involved in something illegal. Ava's stomach twisted painfully hearing the words spoken aloud. Damien's expression remained unreadable. "And?" Victor took one step forward. "Fear makes people talk." Ava immediately shook her head. "I would never say anything." Victor ignored her completely. "You know the federal task force has been circling us for months. One nervous employee is all it takes for somebody to start asking questions." Damien's gaze sharpened slightly. "She is not talking to federal agents." "Not intentionally," Victor replied. "But scared people make mistakes." The sentence landed heavily in the room because it was true. Ava knew it was true. She had already made one mistake tonight. One wrong message. One moment of panic. Damien slowly turned his head toward Ava then, studying her face quietly while Victor continued. Speaking. "Let me relocate her somewhere safe for a few weeks," Victor said carefully. "Until this situation settles." Relocate. The word sounded polite. Too polite. Ava suddenly felt ice spread through her chest. Damien noticed instantly. "No," he said calmly. Victor blinked once. Boss. I said no. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. One of the guards near the elevator shifted uncomfortably, but kept his eyes lowered. Victor exhaled slowly through his nose, clearly fighting irritation now. You are making this personal. Damien's eyes lifted back toward him. Dark. Steady. Dangerous. I am making it clear, he answered quietly. She stays here. Victor looked genuinely surprised for the first time since entering the penthouse. Ava was too. Damien Moretti was not known for protecting frightened maids. Men like him protected assets, territory, power, not people like her. Victor crossed his arms tightly. You trust her that much? Damien glanced toward Ava briefly before answering. I trust fear I can understand. The words hit Ava harder than she expected. Something in Damien's voice carried no mockery, no manipulation, just truth. Victor seemed to notice it too, because his expression darkened immediately. Boss, he said carefully, this is exactly how problems begin. Damien took one slow step forward now, and suddenly the entire room became still. No, he replied softly. Problems begin when people forget who gives the orders in this house. Complete silence followed. Even the rain outside seemed quieter somehow. Victor held Damien's stare for several long seconds before finally nodding once. Tight. Controlled. Unhappy. Understood. But as Victor turned toward the elevator again, his cold eyes brushed past Ava one last time. And in that brief glance, Ava saw something terrifyingly clear. Victor Salazar might obey Damien Moretti, but he did not agree with him. And men who disagreed inside worlds like this rarely forgot it. Ava barely slept that night. Damien had insisted she remain on the private penthouse level until morning, claiming it was safer than the staff quarters downstairs. Safer. The word sounded strange coming from a man the entire city feared. Yet sometime around 3 a.m, curled stiffly beneath a cashmere blanket on the oversized sofa near the library, Ava realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, she had fallen asleep without listening for angry footsteps outside a bedroom door. Dawn arrived gray and rainy over Lake Michigan, soft light spilling through the towering windows while the mansion slowly woke beneath them. Ava sat quietly at the kitchen island nursing a cup of coffee she barely touched. Her nerves still had not settled from the night before. Every sound downstairs made her tense automatically. Every elevator chime tightened her chest. Damien appeared shortly after 7 dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked carved onto him. His dark hair was still slightly damp from the shower, and silver cufflinks flashed briefly beneath the kitchen lights as he adjusted his sleeve. Powerful. Controlled. Untouchable. Yet there was exhaustion beneath his eyes this morning that expensive suits could not hide. Ava stood immediately. I can go back downstairs now, she said softly. Damien glanced at her over the knot of his tie. No, Ava frowned slightly. But my shift starts in 20 minutes. You are not cleaning rooms today. Then what am I supposed to do? Damien walked toward the espresso machine with calm precision, as if protecting frightened maids during mafia disputes was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning activity. Stay where security can see you. Ava stared at him. You really think Victor would ignore your orders? Damien did not answer immediately. That silence told her enough. He handed her a fresh cup of coffee instead. Victor has been with me since I was 22 years old, he said quietly. He believes caution keeps people alive. And you disagree? Damien looked toward the rain-covered windows for a moment before answering. I think fear can make good men cruel. The sentence lingered heavily between them. Before Ava could respond, Damien's phone buzzed sharply against the marble counter. His expression darkened instantly as he read the screen. What happened? Ava asked carefully. Damien set the phone down slowly. Your brother's hospital room received flowers this morning. Ava blinked in confusion. Flowers? Damien's gaze lifted toward her. No sender name. Just a card. Cold unease spread through Ava's chest immediately. What did it say? Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Pretty things should stay where they belong. Ava's blood turned to ice. Malik. Her little brother had nothing to do with any of this. Oh my God. She stood so quickly the chair legs scraped sharply against the marble floor. They know about Malik? Damien was already reaching for his coat. Apparently. Panic flooded Ava instantly. I have to go to the hospital. No, Damien, he is 16. Her voice cracked hard now. He is alone there. Damien stepped closer, lowering his voice carefully. And if somebody wants you scared enough to make mistakes, where do you think they expect you to run? Ava froze. The realization hit her immediately. The hospital. Public. Emotional. Vulnerable. Exactly the kind of place frightened people stopped thinking clearly. Damien watched the fear spread across her face and softened his tone slightly. My security team is already there. Ava blinked. You sent people? The moment the flowers arrived. Something in her chest shifted painfully hearing that. Nobody had protected her family before. Not teachers. Not landlords. Not neighbors who heard shouting through thin apartment walls and turned televisions louder instead of calling for help. But Damien Moretti had quietly sent security to a hospital room before she even asked. Ava looked down at her shaking hands, overwhelmed suddenly by emotion she could not explain. Damien noticed immediately. Your brother is safe, he said quietly. I gave my word. Ava looked up slowly. And for the first time since that terrible text message changed everything, she realized the most dangerous man in Chicago sounded personally offended that someone had frightened her. By noon, the Moretti mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Men in dark suits moved through the hallways speaking in low voices that stopped the moment Ava appeared. Security near the elevators doubled. Phones rang constantly downstairs. Even the kitchen staff whispered nervously while pretending not to look at her. Ava hated it. She hated knowing every tense conversation somehow circled back to one stupid text message sent in panic. Damien had ordered her to remain upstairs for most of the morning, but around 1 o'clock, he finally summoned her to his private office overlooking the lake. The moment Ava stepped inside, she sensed something had changed. Damien stood behind his massive desk, one hand resting against the polished wood while several printed photographs lay spread before him. His expression was colder now. Sharper. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. Victor Salazar stood across from the desk with 2 other captains beside him. All 3 men looked tense. Ava stopped near the doorway immediately. You wanted to see me? Damien's gaze lifted toward her briefly. Come here. Ava obeyed carefully, painfully aware of Victor watching her with visible distrust. As she approached the desk, Damien slid one of the photographs toward her. It showed a grainy image from a parking garage security camera. A man in a baseball cap placing flowers at the St. Mary's reception desk that morning. Ava frowned slightly. I do not know him. You are not supposed to, Victor muttered coldly. Damien ignored him completely. He placed a second photograph beside the first. This time, Ava's breath caught. Victor Salazar appeared in the image shaking hands with the same man outside a downtown restaurant 2 nights earlier. The room became deathly still. Victor's jaw tightened instantly. That proves nothing. Damien looked up slowly. Then explain why the man threatening my employee had direct contact with you. Because he works private security, Victor answered sharply. I hire contractors all the time. Damien's expression never changed. Interesting. He tapped another photograph calmly. Because according to federal records, he also works for the same crew that attempted to kill the undercover officer last night. Silence crashed through the room. Ava looked between both men, confused and frightened. Victor stared at Damien for several long seconds, before laughing once under his breath. Not amused. Cornered. You think I betrayed you over a maid? Damien's voice remained terrifyingly calm. I think you got careless. One of the captains near Victor shifted uncomfortably. Nobody else spoke. The office suddenly felt too small for breathing. Victor looked toward Ava then with open frustration burning behind his eyes. This is insane, he snapped. She is a frightened housekeeper who panicked and sent messages to the wrong person. And suddenly everybody loses their minds. Damien's gaze darkened instantly. Do not mistake fear for weakness. The sentence landed hard enough to silence the room completely. Ava felt her chest tighten unexpectedly, hearing him defend her like that in front of his own men. Victor clearly noticed too. "You're protecting her like family," he said carefully. Damien took one slow step around the desk now, and the temperature in the office seemed to drop 10 degrees. "No," he replied softly. "I am protecting someone who did nothing wrong." Victor opened his mouth again, but Damien cut him off before another word escaped. "You threatened her brother to force obedience." Damien's voice stayed low and controlled. "That means you threatened somebody under my protection." Complete silence followed. One of the captains lowered his eyes immediately. The other shifted backward slightly. Even Victor seemed to realize he had crossed a line that could not be talked away anymore. Damien looked toward the security chief standing near the door. "Escort Mr. Salazar off the property. Effective immediately." Ava's breath caught. Victor froze. "Damien." It was the first time all day he sounded uncertain. Damien did not even look at him again. "You forgot something important," he said quietly. "Fear may control weak men, but respect controls loyal ones." Nobody moved for several seconds. Then Victor slowly removed the security badge from inside his coat and placed it carefully on Damien's desk. The soft click echoed through the silent office like a final judgment. 3 days later, the mansion finally became quiet again. The tension that had hung over the marble hallways since Ava's text message slowly faded, replaced by the careful calm of people pretending nothing unusual had happened. But Ava knew better. She noticed how security staff now nodded respectfully when she passed instead of avoiding eye contact. She noticed how nobody whispered around her anymore. Most of all, she noticed that Victor Salazar's office downstairs remained dark and empty. Rain no longer covered Chicago that Friday evening. The sunset spilled gold across Lake Michigan, warm light pouring through the massive penthouse windows while Ava carefully folded fresh linens inside Damien's private study. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive coffee, calm in a way it had not been all week. She still could not fully understand how her life had changed so quickly. One wrong message, one moment of fear, and suddenly the most powerful man she had ever met had turned the entire mansion upside down, protecting her. Ava placed the final stack of folded towels neatly beside the leather sofa when she heard Damien's voice behind her. "You missed a spot." Her heart jumped before she turned and realized he was looking toward the dusty corner of a bookshelf with the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. Ava blinked in surprise. That was almost a joke. Damien loosened the knot of his tie slightly as he walked farther into the room. "Do not spread rumors." Ava smiled before she could stop herself. A real smile this time. Not the polite, nervous kind she wore for survival. Damien noticed immediately. Something softer flickered briefly across his face before disappearing beneath his usual composure. "How is Malik?" he asked quietly. "Good." Ava's voice warmed instantly at her brother's name. "The doctors moved his surgery date up." Damien nodded once like he already knew. Which, honestly, he probably did. Ava hesitated before speaking again. "The hospital said somebody donated enough money to cover the remaining balance." Damien walked toward the windows overlooking the glowing Chicago skyline. "That was not me." Ava frowned slightly. "Really?" "No," he slipped one hand into his pocket calmly. "It was my accountant." Ava stared at him for 2 full seconds before laughing softly under her breath. Damien's mouth almost curved into a smile. Almost. Silence settled comfortably between them after that. Not awkward. Not fearful. Just quiet. Ava realized suddenly how strange that felt. Her entire life, silence had usually meant danger was coming. But here, standing inside Damien Moretti's penthouse, while the city lights shimmered below them, silence felt peaceful for once. Damien reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. He set it gently on the desk beside her. Ava looked down in confusion. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside rested a brand new phone. Simple. Expensive. Sleek black glass untouched by fingerprints. Ava looked back up slowly. "Mine?" Damien nodded once. "Private number only." Ava's throat tightened unexpectedly. "You did not have to do this." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She held the phone carefully in both hands like something fragile. After a moment, she noticed there was already one contact saved inside. Damien. Nothing else. No staff numbers. No security office. Just him. Ava looked up slowly, emotion catching painfully in her chest. Damien met her eyes steadily across the warm amber light of the study. Next time you are scared, he said softly, message me directly. The room went completely silent after that. Outside, Chicago glowed beneath the darkening sky while waves rolled quietly against the lake beyond the glass. Ava looked down at the phone in her hands again, remembering the terror she felt only days earlier when she accidentally sent the wrong text to the wrong man. But standing here now, she finally understood something the entire city had gotten wrong about Damien Moretti. The most dangerous thing about him was not his power. It was the fact that once he decided someone deserved protection, he took their fear personally. And for the first time in years, Ava Brooks no longer felt invisible.